when you go live.
I know, right? It is, going live is always fun.
Yeah.
There's no do-overs.
And even though it's just like theatre, you just gotta roll with it.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go. Loud music coming to an end. I know, I'm live right now. Right, okay, hi everybody. We are live right here on the Matt Brown Show. My team are scrambling, but I don't take shit for a living. And with me in the studio is none other than my main man, Mike Sharman. Hi, buddy.
That's how you put a guest under pressure. Hey, we're just going live.
Yeah, we're going live, dude. I don't mess around.
Just get into it.
This is not my first rodeo. It's everybody else must play catch.
Fortunately, it's not mine either.
Jonathan, you're in the shot. You're in the shot.
It's Jonathan, man.
Right, okay. So today we're going to be talking about this here book called Brandalism. Building Brands by Vandalizing the Status Quo from Mike here, who's an award-winning author of The Best Deck. I know, right? Great title. So, Mike, great to have you back, man. It's obviously not your first time here on the show.
It's been a minute. Sure, it's been a few years, eh?
It's been, dude, and we were speaking, funny enough, about storytelling and the Pepsi debacle. Remember when that ad went south?
Jeez, when was that? 2018, 17, 16?
Oh, man.
Wow.
Years. A long time, man.
Years ago.
The show's been around 7 years now. It's crazy, eh? That was like when I was still running around with a whole bag full of
that's when you were still pre-recording and editing.
Yeah,
We're just throwing guests into the deep end.
Doing everything myself. I know. Mav, I hope you've updated the name of this episode that's now live everywhere. Thank you for signing this book.
I even wrote you a love letter. Didn't just sign it. You got your own bespoke.
For always being so supportive and being a real rock star. Keep up brandalizing in the States. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's get into this then. But let's go back a step. Before we get into the meat and potatoes, for those of our viewers and listeners around the world who don't know anything about you, who is Mike Sharman? What do we need to know? Talk to me or let them know about Retroviral. You know, what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, the elevator pitch is really, I'm the founder of Retroviral, which is a digital content marketing agency, and we've made more brands go globally viral than any other agency in Africa. So that's kind of our calling card,
Amazing.
Really.
That's great, dude.
Yeah, we've been operating since 2010, and every year we've managed to make at least one brand go viral, just with a mixture of content, strategy, and science, really. And that science really equates to taking content and getting it out to the right sort of eyeballs, get the right shareability, but also overlaying sales data. You know, for us, so many agencies get obsessed with the creative, but ultimately, is that creative having an impact on your business? Because that's why we exist, to help brands become more marketable and get the click-throughs, conversions, transactions.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you're going to share some examples, I hope, right, around
so.
What you've covered here. So I think the thing that's really interesting for me is the word science, because there's lots of documented evidence that proves the value of creativity. Big networks. I know TBWA very well. All the guys from Ogilvy, etc. So I'm a complete convert when it comes to the value of creativity. What's interesting for me, observing, you guys did very well. I think it was at the Bookmarks recently, right? You had a whole bunch of awards and stuff.
Last year was a good one.
You've won more awards than my company by some miles. So,
and that's a lot, man.
I know that's a lot, right? We've won one, Africa's Best Tech Startup. That was it. We were like, we're done now. We won it all. Science is really key. So talk to us about science. Like, what role does if you can basically say that you have, made more brands go viral than any other company, like, what's the role of science in that? Because I get the creative storytelling piece, but how does science play a role in this? Are you able to predict whether something's going to work?
Well, there are certain elements within, especially paid media spaces. You can predetermine KPIs and what that reach and engagement and potential click-throughs are going to be. Where the science comes in is that you start with the storytelling process. That's the remarkability phase. But if you don't connect the dots between the audience, you're going to fail flat. And so many companies that drive their own branded content rely on paid media to get the word out there. But at the end of the day, that's just a vanity metric. That's an awareness thing. For me to really create sticky content, you have to have the remarkable content and you have to seed it to the right audience. And by leveraging multiple touch points, it's influencers, it's using PR, it's understanding the distribution channels that exist within your actual paid environments, such as now TikTok is obviously one of the largest growing platforms in the world, and being able to be first to market, but also not neglecting those traditional thinkings around push notifications or even SMS and email marketing. You know, so many agencies hunt the new trend because they want to be the first on something. They want to be the best at TikTok, or they want to be the best at, you know, XYZ. But so many times they forget that it's actually an integrated ecosystem, and it's by pulling the various levers within those different platforms that ultimately would generate the best return on investment.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you are touching on, because channels are so important. I think many people get lost in how things look. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, but you know, Ferrari must also go fast.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Of
It must
course.
also give you a feeling that you can connect to this brand or this story or this product or this service that, you know, is sitting in front of me on Facebook or LinkedIn or on email, or, you know, as you mentioned, all these different channels, TikTok, etc.
And I think, just going to jump in there, because I think the look is an important thing, but I think too many people obsess over the look.
Yes.
And for me, you know, that old adage of done is better than perfect is a great example to get to market. By being in lockdown for the last 2.5 years, we've also realized that as audiences, we're a little bit less critical of the craft. So TikTok, once again, I think we'll use it multiple times as examples, because especially in the last year, that's where a lot of the virality has been driven by. Less throttling of that algorithm, the more spread of content. We worked with Donovan, Goliath, and Davina. They became like the couple of lockdown in terms of creating remarkable viral content. We worked with them last year on Checker 6060 when the app was being pushed. The guys had sampled an old Mendoza track with 50-50, let's go 50-50, and they'd updated it to let's go 60-60. So I worked with Don and Davina, and I said, you guys have just had a baby. I mean, you know, the newborn phase is like PTSD. You know, it's a few years ago now for both of us. But ultimately, have you ever tried to find baby formula in Cape Town on a Sunday night? I mean, it's easier to find tick on the streets. And ultimately, I said to Don, you know, there's so many insights that so many parents of us have dealt with during those early stages in the trenches of babyhood. And we were just riffing between each other, all via Zoom or WhatsApp or, you know, whatever the new normal is. And I said, Don, you know, there's a beautiful moment of run out of nappies. My wife's not happy. Let's go 60-60. And how can you plug those human insights and premises into using the app? And you know, it was a banger of a piece of content, and so simple, low production values. He shot and edited on his phone, and you know, you can get that stuff out so much quicker nowadays. So for me, I think that's a great example of just, you got to run with an insight and the smarts, and if you get the right audience and the right channels, that's when things can really blow up.
Amazing, dude. So can we, I want to go deeper there, because I want to get into algorithms. I want to get into insight mining and all this kind of stuff, you know, because I think these are very important things for entrepreneurs, you know, to be using in whatever it is that they do. But obviously the payoff line here, or the kind of byline here, is building brands by vandalizing the status quo. Well, what is the status quo? What is that?
So let's start off with the S&P 500, just as an umbrella of businesses and success and status, right? And if you look at the 70s and 80s, the average business age of the S&P 500 in the States, those companies were 50, 60 years old. So they were established, they were gargantuan, they were like giant, and some of them were even monopolistic. The reality is here, fast forward to modern day, the average age of those companies is less than 18 years old. So think of 18-year-old companies. Facebook, I mean, less than 18 is Instagram, is YouTube. So there's pretty much only a handful of companies that have really only been around for 18 years. It's less than 2 decades. And you know that in the quantum, that's a very short period of time. So the likelihood is, if you're not a Facebook, you're going to be dead tomorrow. And that's a really terrifying thing. If you don't continue to really vandalize your own business to prevent it from cannibalization in its current market, if you don't vandalize the way that you used to do stuff, you almost have to think like a vandal. You almost have to destroy your logo and start again. You almost have to destroy the way that you did stuff. A friend of ours, Rich Mulholland, he talks about legacide and how legacy can actually kill business. And we're seeing more and more of that. Look how many people crumbled and how many implosions there were during lockdown. It's because businesses aren't willing to take the risk once they've hit that top tier, number 2 or number 1 in the market. You get to number 2, number 1, you get safe. You forget the agile early startup phases of having to hustle and get out there. Think about the Vodacoms and Vodaphones of the world. In those early days, they were real hustlers. They were taking on landlines. Landlines were the behemoths. And then suddenly today, like they're in a position where they are the most adopted piece of tech from a mobility point of view. But we know, we've seen it with Nokia, we've seen it with BlackBerry. These things can capitulate overnight. And if you aren't willing to continue to challenge yourself and challenge what your look and feel is and how you present yourself to the market, something else will come along and eventually destroy you.
Can I share a real world story that's basically points on what you've just said?
Please.
So so let's see. So 4 years ago, roughly, when we won the best award there is to win, Africa's best tech startup.
Obviously.
We were just shooting the lights out because we were organically servicing a niche, which was the technology sector, using a business that was built around the problem that they had, which was, how do you give me a high quality lead? That was basically it. And we used storytelling, data, funnily enough, and channels. That was it. And the product was called the Lightning Strike. And for 3 years, just grew double revenue for 3 years, etc. So I'm being acquired at the moment. So
congrats.
Thank you. But then COVID happened. Okay, so businesses die. And that's what I love about what you're saying. And that's something that I actually believe also. Take your S&P story. That's 18 years, right? Facebook's on the decline. In another 5 years, we don't know. I mean, I'm saying you just don't know.
Yeah, you really
maybe
don't.
It'll be there, maybe it won't. You just don't know. Businesses die every day. And you mentioned Kodak, you mentioned all these things. I know they're older brands and stuff, but like think about what COVID did to the startups ecosystem. It killed hundreds of thousands of businesses, decimated the SME sector in retail hospitality. There was no plan fucking B for them. It was game over, right? And so businesses die. Going back to digital kung fu, our revenue started to drop. We dropped by 40% in our last financial year.
Oh.
Not great, but it's like, how long can the thing continually exponentially grow for? And we found the answer now. We were like, well, it can't. You can't go to like 80 million. Like it's not possible in this sector. So what we've had to do now, Mike, to your point, is vandalize our business. That's exactly what we've done literally now in the last couple of weeks. Repositioning the business in terms of its proposition, which is now not leads. It's sales transformation. So we work with sales teams directly. In other words, we've repositioned the company to become a brand that can work with any sales team in any industry.
Wow.
Right? So it's still niche in that we're a sales transformation business.
But you're unlocking the multiple verticals,
there
right?
There you go. That's exactly what we've done now. And so the new acquirer will be taking that over as a value prop. But it illustrates what you've said. And that, by the way, is a 36-month, maybe a 42-month transitional journey. In other words, it's a complete startup again.
Yeah.
It's a complete startup.
And I'm a huge fan of unlocking a niche and really being an expert within that niche and building out into that. But then, like you say, you're going to hit a ceiling at some point. So then how do you slot that or pivot it? Oh, sorry, that's a marketing swear jar word.
You do it.
Into those other verticals. Like, can something in tech work in hospitality? Can it work in retail? And, people give Zuckerberg a hard time. And, we joke about his haircuts and his metaverse videos. But the reality is like, if you look at those stories and those analogies from within Facebook, when desktop was the dominant platform, people were like, oh my God, no one's ever going to leave desktop. Computers on your phone, that's crazy talk, man. That's like Back to the Future stuff. And the reality was he could see the impending doom of the desktop and the growth, especially in emerging markets, of mobile. And he said, listen, I don't want to see presentations on PowerPoint on your laptops. If you bring PowerPoint, I'm going to throw that shit out the window. And eventually people did. Someone actually brought, here's my laptop, I'm going to present. Hey, yeah, Mark, I'm going to present this presentation on PowerPoint. And then the rumor has it that he threw it out the window from like the top floor of Facebook offices, because they knew that the thing in your palm of your hand, that's where the best route to market would be. The mobile was going to be the thing that grew. And that's where, people will bemoan the fact that they took down competitors, or they shamelessly stole features from the Snapchats of the world and just popped them into Instagram, like with Reels. But I think you have to be that cutthroat, and you have to look at cannibalizing your own features in order to be able to evolve and survive. And that's the Brandalism premise.
So, Mike, the thing that's in the front of my mind at the moment is culture. So, what I've seen from the work you guys do, like, the one thing that comes to mind is there was the octopus story. What is it? My octopus teacher. Yeah. So that was like everyone was talking about that, right? Jesus, Hardy Dosh just arrived at the studio window. He wants to come on the show. And then you guys did something around that, didn't you? Or you were involved in that.
My creepy teacher.
Yeah, for Creepy Crawly, right? So please explain that to me, and to our audience, because for me it's a classic example of vandalism in action, and also it's based in culture.
Yeah. I think it's the quintessential news hijacking is what they used to call it in old school PR terms. And for me, I love content and I love watching shows, whether it be YouTube, Netflix, etc. And when we were kids, especially in South Africa, I mean, for context for the international audience and listeners out there, like we used to get Friends about 6 to 12 months after the US had seen it. We also only ever got to see Friends on linear TV once a week. So on Wednesday nights, you had to tune in, you had to see your half an hour of Friends, and then that was the thing we could talk about with all our mates at school, and that was it. And we lived in this little ecosystem. That was our water cooler moment. Now with the proliferation of streaming, we are all connected and tapped in to global culture. Think Tiger King, think about Tinder Swindler, think about all the things that we're currently watching at the moment and we're talking about. It's not a conversation in the southern tip of Africa, it's a conversation at a global level. We all get the shows at the same time, and we all are plugged into culture at a much more real-time speed. So 2020 was intense. It was the most for a lot of us. We were all surviving. We were treading water. We were taking 7 to 10 Zoom calls a day, which nearly broke us. And one night I got home, and I'd been hearing a lot of PR around this octopus teacher story. It was shot in Cape Town. And I was just like, I'm quite an arty-farty. I'm happy to admit that. So watched it at home. My mother-in-law was there. My wife and I were watching together. And I really loved it. I said, this is a beautiful story. I mean, the ocean and untapped exploration, all this great stuff. And my wife was so cynical. She said, you know what, dude? If you left your kids and me to go and deal with your own shit and swim with an octopus every day, listen, I would pack your bags and I'd leave them on the front door. Yeah, there she was.
Your wife sounds like my wife. She was also like, what a load of shit.
They could be besties. Anyway, so then I was like, this is quite funny. And then I used to ride my bike a lot in my cul-de-sac during hard lockdown. And then I would ride my bike also as like a little bit of a breather from all the craziness. And I just thought, you know what, let's make a spoof of this thing. This would be incredible. So I had a few thoughts. We'd also been chatting to Creepy Crawly in the build-up to the Paralympics, which never happened because the Olympics and Paralympics were cancelled for that year. And said to my wife, because she had a good relationship with Creepy Crawly, like, let's pitch them this idea of creating a spoof, but the guy doesn't swim with an octopus. He swims in his pool with his Creepy Crawly. Let's, bring this inanimate object to life in a much more tangible way. And we created a campaign for Creepy Crawly about 6 or 7 years prior, where we spoofed the crocodile hunter. It was the Creepy Crawly wrangler, Jason Goliath, a local comedian. He was just starting to explode, and he just went and he basically wrangled creepies out of people's pools because he couldn't deal with that noise. And that did so well at the time. But I mean, well at the time was 100,000 organic views in a few days. With this thing, we pitched the idea. The scripts were ready. We bounced it backwards and forwards on WhatsApp. We got the client to unlock some budget. The guys shot it on a Friday, edited it on a Saturday. It was live on a Sunday. So within like 76 hours, this thing was banging and ready to go. And it dropped on a Sunday. We used what we call influencers, which is our kind of approach to micro or nano influencers. They're just regular Joes. You just seed it through them. And you basically put content out in the world that it doesn't feel like it's owned by the brand. That for me has been a lot of the best learnings, is like leveraging influencers to tell your story. They don't come across like they've been paid or been bought to say a nice thing about a brand. And that story was so remarkable that it just absolutely started exploding. And for me, you've got these listening tools, ORM tools, online reputation management. And I would follow that. Like, I follow that stuff obsessively, because for me, when we launch content, I go into this mode of like distribution. So who are the most influential journalists and media that I can send stuff to? Because for me, journalists are the original influencers. They've got the biggest channels, and they ultimately come with the biggest credibility. So when your content is being shared by people on social, that's great. But when your content makes it onto the news, that's still for me such a valuable proposition. So yeah, got into the news, and the next thing, this thing was exploding. 2.5 million views in a couple of days. People were talking around the world. Best ad of the day in Mexico. Ladies talking about it on podcasts in Australia, being spoken about in Europe, North America. It was wild. And it ultimately came back to the fact that here's a remarkable piece of content that people found funny, but it wasn't overly branded. It wasn't overly pushed in your face. We didn't use paid media techniques. And ultimately, they could track that there was an increase in sales year on year. Also going live just before spring. That's the time when people are considering, what am I going to do with my pool? What am I going to add from an accessories point of view? And it just absolutely hit all the right buttons with all those various touch points. So yes, there is science, but you also, sometimes you have to get a little bit of luck from the viral gods, as they say.
Yeah, you know what I'm excited about listening to you talk, Mike, is that, you know, I remember when I was providing, let's just say, digital strategy work to, this is before, you know, the latest businesses were founded and whatever, but it seems like 20 years ago. But I remember the word viral was like a thing you don't use. It was like, or the brief would come from the customer, like, you know, make our campaign go viral for our new checking card. It's like, no, dude, no one gives a fuck about your checking card, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm so excited about, you know, you being here is that you're a true innovator, dude.
That's
and you know, that thing that you wrote about in this book, you know, about me being so supportive. I don't think I've actually been supportive enough. To be honest, I should have had you here with the best dick. You know what I mean? But more broadly. So I want to basically let you know and the whole world know how much I respect the work that you're doing, because you're a true innovator in the space. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people provide sort of lip service to, you know, to what it means to do something like this, not write a book, but the ideas in this book, and to really make it work. So congratulations to you, dude. Man. Like, you're really inspiring a lot of, you know, South African entrepreneurs. So you should be really proud of him. So enough of that waffle. So, so now influencer marketing. Never heard about that. Am I an influencer, Matt Brown?
Yeah,
I qualify?
I guess you do. I guess like you started out with a topic that you became an expert at, and I think like it was something that you really owned that niche on. And if you think about the global audience that sucked into the kinds of stuff you were saying, like you were saying it because you cared about it. You're saying it because you weren't a traditional media channel. And I think influencer definitely applies to the type of work you do. The example that I use in there is of my best mate. I used him as a guinea pig, pitched him to Biogen, a supplements business, and they said they wanted to be the most authentic health and wellness brand in the market. And I said, you know what? Your competitors are all paying people that would literally go to the opening of an envelope. And they'd also jump ship between you and your competitors in a heartbeat, because this Jimbut is happy to swap this brand for that brand as long as the paycheck's right. And I said, I've got a mate here. He has no Instagram following, never even Instagrammed. Who do you know that has an Instagram? I mean, it's wild. He was heaviest he'd been in his life. He was the unhealthiest he'd been in his life. We lived in London together. And I said, you know what? This dude is the perfect foil for South Africa's poor health, you know? And it was such a great story because it was so authentic. We took him from never having run a 5K. He was an okay swimmer. He could cycle a little bit. We paired him with a comrades coach and the Team SA triathlon coach, Lisa Raleigh, and a few of the other influencers that Biogen had who were doing like exercising on trampolines and that sort of thing. And we just got him to start to walk. We then got him to jog. We then got him to run up things like the West Cliff stairs, do small triathlons out in the cradle. And he went on to complete a 70.3 half Ironman in Durban. And for those of you who don't know, a half Ironman is a 1.9 kilometer swim, a 90 kilometer cycle, and a 21 kilometer run. You have to do that all in a row, and you have to do it under 8.5 hours. And he did. He finished it. He dropped 30 kilos. It was an inspirational story that generated tons of PR, both locally and internationally. And once again, it had a direct impact on Biogen sales. And that for me is like, that is the perfect example of influencer, because he's not someone who's built a community. He's not a content creator. He's none of these things. He's just a regular Joe. And if regular Joes can make it through, it's the quintessential testimonial for the digital age.
Can we spend a little bit of time here? Because I was having a laugh at influencer yesterday with my producer, Matt. Yes. So I saw something on Facebook, and it was just so cringeworthy, like genuine. I was like, what? I actually said to him, I don't want to bastardize this, but I actually said to him, I mean, what the actual fuck is this? I was like, it's so disingenuous. I actually don't know what to do with it.
What was he selling?
I'm going to say no shit. No me. I'm just saying it doesn't look good.
You plead the fifth.
It doesn't, but it just doesn't look good. You know, how do I look? You know, like
I'm gonna sell something to you.
I'm going to sell something to you, but I'm not really.
Hashtag not sponsored. Hashtag no ad.
Yeah. What I love about the Dell Superior laptop is I'm like, what? Dude, come on, man. And
here I am, just minding my own business. Oh, what are you doing there? Oh, I love this laptop.
So yeah, I mean, I just to maybe spend a little bit of time here. So, and maybe I'm trying to interrogate this because I'm curious. Let's say that you have an influencer and he has 1 million followers on Instagram. That's a sizable amount of reach, right? So for whoever the brand is to go, hey, Mr. Influencer or Miss Influencer, can you do this stuff for us? So there's the reach thing for me that I'm curious about. You're saying that there's an influencer with no following, right? Is for two things. One, is influencer marketing in your perspective broken? And in that example of an influencer with 1 million followers versus someone with nothing, like your mate, why is that better?
So I think there's different objectives and different needs based on your budgets, right? Like for me, I always look at like what are the business objectives from the start. Like you've got to start off the thinking from that perspective. And if you look at real celebrities who are real influencers, there's examples of the Jenners, for example, the Kardashians. I mean, I'm not a fan of the show, but they have real pull and real power in terms of sales. Like there was a pink dress that Kylie Jenner wore to her 21st, I believe. And that searches for that pink dress skyrocketed by like 248% overnight. So there is celebrity culture in the US that can drive sales. She did it for Adidas tracksuits. You've seen it time and time again. Like people are obsessed with that personality and they'll buy off the back of it. The problem that I have with certain individuals that have 1 million plus followers is you don't always know how authentic and how real that is. Whereas PwC has done a whole bunch of different insights, data and white papers around peer-to-peer influence. And the fact that as we evolve and we become more cynical around celebrities trying to push product down our throats, we're like 70% more likely to follow, adhere to, subscribe to something that people within our immediate friendship circle advise. So I'm like, hey, I've had this great experience with this bank. I've had better interest rates. I've had a really good private banker. You're more likely to listen to me saying something like that because I'm coming at it from a real like authenticity kind of space. I had a recent challenge with some insurance and people were like, oh, I've had so many problems myself. And those sorts of stories are a lot more sticky than someone who is just being paid to sell something down your throat. And for me, I think that's the space we're in. Celebrities and proper macro influencers have a place in the market, budget dependent. I mean, the Kardashians and Ronaldo and that sort of level, they're charging like $1 million plus for an Instagram post or a reel. Like the average South African brand couldn't afford that, and it's almost like playing in Super Bowl commercial territory. Like that's big brand with big budget. But if you've got small budgets, influencers can be incredibly impactful if you work with them in the right kind of way. Going back to that Checkers 60/60 example, you don't have to spend a lot in that space to have an impact, especially if you're one of the only brands. I think there was a report last year from the social media landscape where they said that only 20% of brands were really playing in the TikTok space. So here's a new channel with a lot of stickiness, with a lot of opportunity, but can also go horribly wrong. I've seen brands where it's just they're financial services, they don't fit in that space, they look overly compromised. Let the person who is the content creator create for their audience because they know it best. So it's a fine line because brands want control. But what we realize about social, actually the more control you give to the creator, the greater your opportunity or potential opportunity for conversion becomes.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's so difficult to get that balance right though. I mean, especially if you are seems to have I was moving around the studio. But it's a difficult thing to get right. So it's a refreshing point of view. So I'm excited about that. So if you don't mind, I'd love to maybe touch on a few things that you write about in the book because we are here to promote your book. If you haven't heard it, it's called Brandalism. Go and get it now. Where do you get it?
Exclusives, loot.coza, Amazon for a Kindle version. So and obviously the Kindle version is available anywhere in the world.
Okay, sweet. Cool. So a couple of things here. You write about manifesto, not purpose. What exactly is that all about?
I'm a Simon cynic because effectively, people became so obsessed with finding your why and what's your purpose. And for me, I find like purpose is very tactical. It's easy to say that you've got like your obsessed and addicted to growth, but where's the strategy behind that? So for me, I believe you have to develop a manifesto. A manifesto is something that is almost co-written with your staff, with your employees. We talk about the Retroviral Manifesto, and I co-wrote that with my staff because I wanted them to feel like they bought into a vision that we can all share together. And then ultimately, if you want to be the most viral business in the world, it starts like that's the outcome, but the starting point and the strategy is the manifesto.
Yeah, it's for me. I also can't stand that, honestly, because it actually caused so much problem. Like a lot of it almost took like organizational sort of the building blocks of a business at scale. Number one, right? So it's like you need to have a why, and everybody must understand. But my thing is, it's like you don't need to have like the why, you just need to have a why. Your why can change, in the context of why you should get out of bed in the morning. But, if you, in the context of leadership though, for me, it's about getting your team to, and this is what I think I'm hearing from you is, and maybe tell me if you don't agree or not, but it's, people want to join a cause first. Then they want to figure out, what does 2024 look like or 2025 look like afterwards. But their why is, what's the cause here? We want to make, I'm bastardizing your thing now, but for me, it's all around like creating a compelling economic future for our people. That was the cause, and for the world. So do you agree? Is it cause versus manifesto? Like, how is that all different?
I think that you almost have to wrap into a kind of umbrella feeling of where people want to go. Like, ultimately, you want to build a community. It's, we almost see our agency as a community of misfits to a degree where people aren't in a traditional job. They're working in communication, they're working in creativity, they're working for challenger brands, and ultimately you're building something that people can, exactly to your point, they can buy into the cause. And that cause can be slightly nuanced for each of them in the way that they see it based on your leadership style. But they're buying into like your big picture thinking. And the manifesto is the story that they've bought into. And then you can use that manifesto to create those bite-sized milestones. We want to achieve this in the next quarter. We want to achieve this in the next year. Sure, maybe 5 years down the line we'll look a little bit different and we'll head in this direction. But I think it gives someone a lot more tangible stuff to take their own version out of it, whereas that why sometimes is a bit abstract and it doesn't necessarily give you directional points that you can plot along your own personal journey to get to the next level or for you as a leader to take your business forward.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing for me is why's change. I mean, if you go back to the story that I shared with you up front about digital kung fu, like that, the why is not completely different.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, or at least the manifesto will have elements that will fundamentally change because the points that we landed up front is that markets move.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
And that's starting out in a niche space. Retroviral literally started out as an amplification agency. We said, we will play in this little lane. We'll work with agencies and brands. You've got content and you've got everything that you've beautifully packaged. We're going to get it out there. So we were the get it out there guys. We were the get the amplification, get the eyeballs guys. And as we evolved, we became the more full service digital creative agency guys. And I think that's been the beautiful thing, part of that journey is that, the why is malleable, the purpose is malleable, the manifesto can steer you to better tactical outputs.
Cool, Mike. So the next one here I want to touch on is something called scale schmale. Is this all about building businesses at scale or brands at scale? What's that about?
It's taking. I mean, I'm a fan of bootstrapping. So for me, like, I want to start something that can generate revenue as quickly as possible because we don't always have the luxury down in South Africa to have loads and loads of cash that people are throwing at an idea. Like, you have to prove that there's an actual use case and that there's customers for it. So bootstrap. Get it going, get customers, start generating the revenue, and start seeing where you're taking this thing forward because you need cash to survive. We know about cash flow and the importance thereof. But for me, people obsess over, is this thing going to scale? Is it going to be the biggest, best, brightest, multinational, global thing in the world? And for me, in the book, we use the example of NetFlorist. They started out with the most anti-scale approach. They started writing handwritten notes to their customers. Hey, Matt, thanks for buying from us. Have an awesome day. All the best. Or Yuppie Chef, sorry. I messed those examples up. Yuppie Chef. Everything, anytime you purchase something, because they knew that their audience was premium. And when they were buying things, they took the time to personally thank you. And it became like the ritual within the office that everyone from the CEO to the call center agent, everyone got to write a series of letters. And that it like goes against, it's the antithesis of scale based on like MBA insights, but it ultimately generated such great stickiness and emotional connections between the customers, and the fact that you gave a damn about that person buying a cake mixer, that you would thank them for that. Like, what a novel approach.
Yeah, totally. I know you had your book launch at Naked. Has that happened yet? It has happened.
Last
right?
night.
Last night. It went well, I assume.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, it was a pretty intimate kind of affair. And for me, I was procrastinating around getting the book out. But I said to the publisher early on last year, I said, I don't want to do a virtual launch. Like, I'm tired of Zooms and people doing, just postulating over the product that they've put out. Like, I want to talk to people in real life. And for me, it was just a good opportunity to have a few drinks, see some people in real life, and just give them a little bit of background and insight in terms of why it was at Naked. Because, I love the phrase, life is short, play naked. You got to make the most, got to suck the marrow out of life, like Robin Williams said in Dead Poet Society. And for me, Naked is a great example of a passion project. It was the story I told last night. Naked is a coffee shop that's starting to grow and franchise and create multiple locations around South Africa. And the founders, they had a little clothing shop in Melrose Arch where they used to sample brands from around the world and to see how those brands would take in the market. And they were the first guys to bring Superdry out, for example, so that you'd be able to buy Superdry out of this window. And then to keep people browsing those little curtain rails, they would have a little coffee shop window that you could buy your coffee from. The coffee was so good there that they thought, hang on, let's spin this coffee shop out and actually create their own versions. So the first one was in Morningside, which is just a block away from my office. And that became like my local. Love going there, get a coffee. People know me by name. And for me, that's such a rare thing, It's like we've kind of lost that in this scale world. It's like being able to go in, hey Mike, how's it going? Being greeted by name. They know my kids, and it just feels like an extension of your home. And I think if you can get that emotion right, you can start a really small business, and from there you can start scaling those touch points.
Yeah, I agree. Just sticking with Naked for a moment. So I'm like their best customer. You must see how much money I spend a month.
Listen,
at that
it's going to be a close competition, eh?
Dude,
I'll fight you for that title.
Okay, fine. Let's have a look. Let's compare Uber orders over the last year or so. But you know what they do, which is really amazing. So, well, firstly, there is it acai bowl. You know that thing. That shit is legit, dude.
So good.
Let's get them on the show. Side note.
Yes.
But anyway, so talking about exactly what you've said, right? About that, do things to that don't scale so that you can scale. They send me they put a handwritten note in every
Uber
delivery, every single, 9 out of 10, let's just say. And it's every note is different, and it's like, I'm like, you don't see that.
And I've been there when they've been writing those notes for the deliveries. The order comes in from whatever the delivery company is. And then I've seen like everyone from the manager to the waiters. Once again, it's a similar culture to that yuppie chef thing. Everyone takes responsibility. Everyone takes ownership. It's not like you've gotten to the managerial position and you're too good to write Matt a love letter for his banana bread delivery.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. But I love Naked. If you do see a Naked coffee shop, go and support them. It's obviously important for small businesses, but nonetheless, great brand. You'll love it there. So then let's go with, and this will be the last one, second child syndrome. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Talk us through that.
Matt, you've got 2 children. You have the first one, and it's like it's quite intense. Like there's sleepless nights.
That's an understatement, man. it's like you shell shocked.
Listen,
life's
bro.
over.
I mean, I've got 2 little girls that are 13 months apart. Try that for size,
dude.
But for me, you go through these evolutions of business, right? Like starting your first business is the most terrifying thing in the world. You don't know what to do. You might drop it. You might break it. Oh my God, is it still breathing? It's the perfect analogy for parenthood and startup founder spaces. It's the same thing, right? You have the sleepless nights. You worry about finances. You worry about their future. Are they safe? All those kinds of things. Then the second one comes along and you're a little bit better equipped. Like you have the scars. You've been in the trenches. You've been in the war zone, and the second one becomes a little bit easier because you've had the school fees along the journey of the first one. And for me, this applies to both small business and startup founders all the way through to corporates, is that sometimes you have to spin something out. Sometimes you have to start a new business. Sometimes you have to start a new division. Sometimes you just in your R&D working on electric vehicles for the traditional gas guzzlers, for example. And ultimately, your second child is a one that comes with a lot more rich new territory. You get to be in a space where you can actually come with ideas smarter. The challenge, however, is to not neglect your first one. And for those kinds of thinkings, when you continue to compare to parenthood, you can build new divisions, you can go into new verticals, you can go into new spaces, but take the learnings from the first child. Don't neglect the second child. Don't pander too much to the second one, but also don't lose sight of the first one and the joy that it gives you, and obviously the revenue and the returns on the back of that. So for me, I think it's an important analogy by being in the trenches with small children to show you why parenthood and founding companies is a very similar thing, and the lessons that you can take from those spaces.
Mike, personal question.
Yes.
What's been the greatest lesson that parenting has taught you?
The greatest lesson is probably a mixture of humility, but also not taking yourself so seriously. Like when you look at kids as like a fly on a wall scenario, they're always learning things for the first time. They're always experiencing life for the first time. So you become so jaded the older you become as an adult. But if you actually just stop and see the beauty that a child seeing a dandelion for the first time brings to their lives, like we should appreciate things a lot more. We should be present more. We should live in the moment more. And the problem is these devices is that they take a lot of that joy and they take a lot of being present out of our lives. So it's an important lesson of balance around what do you invest in your business that keeps you going, keeps you motivated, keeps the money coming into your household, but at the same time, don't neglect your household. Don't lose that.
Two things I'd like to add to that. So for me, children are closer to God than any adult is, just by virtue of their energy. And you see how they, like, the first time they run into a wall. I don't have kids. I have terrorists.
You're a bomb specialist.
Yeah. And in the process of, it's like your first one, you want to protect them. It's like, God, oh my God, the child's like, it's going to fall over. It's like, yeah, kids fall, or he or she's it's crying, I panic, but kids love to cry, and so what I've learned, and probably the greatest lesson other than like the obvious, is that it's like I'm no longer the center of my universe, but it's actually about control and allowing things to happen on their own. Do you know what I mean? Like allowing a child to fail, allowing a child to make mistakes, allowing a child to cry or hurt himself or herself, not because you're a vindictive parent, but because it's a necessary part of growth. You know what I mean? You can't grow unless you make mistakes, unless you fail, etc.
Once again, it's another perfect example to help learn the art of delegation for staff, for your teams, to step back from having to be the jack or Jill of all trades. Like your staff are going to make mistakes, they are going to fail, and you are going to try and catch them, and you're going to miss at times. And I think that for me, it is such a great insight, because if you really want to grow a business that you can be proud of, that can bring joy to your life, you also need to be able to step back and let the child hurt themselves, let the business hurt itself, because ultimately there's lessons to be learned for staff and business itself.
So Mike, let's couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. So here's the book again, guys, go get it. Brandalism. We've only touched obviously the surface of the stuff here. What do you hope, like what is your intention here around this book? What kind of difference are you trying to make?
For me, you know how it is writing a book. It's a very strange process. You kind of vacillate between narcissism to is it good enough, or who actually gives a shit? Why would I want to read this? For me, I think what I like to do is I just like to take my own learnings and I like to put it out there in the world and say, these are places where I failed, these are places where I succeeded, and hopefully you can take some learnings out of that. Like for me, I think the best mentorship approach in the world is not to tell people how to do stuff, is to give people analogies and examples of real world situations. And then hopefully if one or two people take insight or they take a lesson from that and they apply it to their own situation for their own betterment, that's a great space. Like I think from my first book that I put out, I got such wonderful letters and DMs and Facebook messages of people that are just like, hey, I really like this part because it did X, or another person saying this did Y. And I think that, that for me is the best thing about the internet, is the knowledge share and open source. Is like just putting stuff out there, and if someone benefits from it, like, you want to leave the world in a better place than you found it. And for me, like, I love sharing. I'm a natural like connector, and I love being able to say something that someone can take value from and run with it. And I think if one person can decide to start a business because they've read this, one person decides to leave their corporate job and takes the risk and they succeed, like, there's nothing better than, once again, back to the child analogy, seeing people that have come through our doors going on to achieve absolute greatness. Like, there's nothing that gives me more joy than seeing that someone who is an extension of our universe has gone out to dominate at a global position. Like, it's, it's a little bit esoteric and sounds a little bit utopian, but, just... That's what gives me the feels.
Because it is, as you're human, you're allowed to say those things. This is my thing. I mean, people, like, especially in, I don't know where it comes to society, but it's like, you can't be vulnerable, you can't be empathetic, you can't have those motivations. It's like, fuck you.
Yeah, I'll do what I want.
Do you know what I mean? Who are you to judge me? I don't give a shit. But I hear what you're saying, though. I mean, it's why I do the show. It's to, jump, do it, jump. What have you got? Everything to gain, probably a lot to lose too, but more to gain. And it's a very personal journey, and this is what I appreciate so much about you sharing, your stories about your kids, and obviously packaging all the personal journey that you've been on, not only in your first book, but this book as well.
Thanks,
so I think we are totally aligned on that. So again, it's a great why.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon.
There you go, Simon. Simon, you got to come on the show, dude. Yeah. So there you go, guys. We bring it up on screen for everybody. Mike's gonna love us and leave us. It's called Brandalism by Mike Sharman. Go get it everywhere in your favorite bookstore. Hopefully, we've been able to create an itch for you guys to go and buy this thing. Mike, thank you for being here again, man. It's been a real privilege.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all the listeners.